Okay, I'm back. Now, it looks like it only gives me 10 minutes per video because I'm using the dual screen. So it just means you're going to have to watch more videos. I apologize for that. Back to what I was saying. Corax and Tisius, a funny story about them. Corax was a teacher, Tisius a student, and they had an agreement among themselves. Tisius got Corax to agree that he would not owe him any money for his teaching until he won his first case in court. Now apparently then Tisius took full advantage of that. Learned and learned and learned, but didn't actually go and argue any cases in court. And so finally, Corax took him to court and sued him for the money. And he argued that if Tisius lost, then the court would order him to pay. And if Tisius won, then he would have fulfilled the agreement and he would have to pay. So either way, he was forcing Tisius to pay. Tisius argued in return that if he lost, then Corax wasn't a good teacher to him. And if he won, then the judge ordered he didn't have to pay it. The judge, in response, called them both knuckleheads, threw it out, and threw it out of court altogether. So that was the era of technical rhetoric. Again, that's right around 400 to 466 BC, somewhere in that era. Sophistical rhetoric emphasized the speaker's ability. The emphasis switched. The sophists are both famous and infamous. Very controversial today, but they were not controversial in their day. Now today, sophistry is any kind of flattery, slick salesman type of rhetoric that's used to get people to do something that they don't want to do. It's chicanery with words. It's a misuse of rhetoric. Deceitful rhetoric, flattery, and so on. Technical rhetoric emphasized the content of the speech, but the sophistical rhetoric was developing an emphasis on the speaker's ability. And you will get an opportunity to read one of the prominent sophists, which was Gorgias. And Gorgias argued that you didn't even have to know what you were talking about. If you were trained by him, you were a capable speaker, you would be able then to persuade the ignorant, really. And in fact, Socrates lampooned it as the ignorant persuading the ignorant, blind leaders of the blind. Sophists, instead of teaching rules, taught by imitation and memorization. They prepared and delivered sample speeches. Their students would listen to the speech, watch their delivery of it, and then their students would get up and deliver the same speech, imitating their teacher. They provided lists of commonplaces, sample arguments that their students could learn that could be inserted into any appropriate situation. The most prominent of the sophists was Gorgias and Socrates. Socrates is distinct from Socrates, though they were contemporaries. Gorgias lived from 480 to 375 BC. He was alive during the Peloponnesian Wars, in the time of Esther and Daniel, Malachi, Xerxes, Artaxerxes, and so on. He was a contemporary of Plato and Socrates. He used rhyme and rhythm and parallelism. He was a very poetic speaker. And according to Plato, now the only record that we have of Gorgias and of many of these figures comes from Plato. And Plato said that Gorgias, and in fact in his essay, the Gorgias, he quotes Gorgias as defining rhetoric as the art of persuasion in courts of law and other assemblies. Socrates attacked Gorgias. In fact, that's what the Gorgias is essentially a debate, a Socratic type of debate between Socrates and Gorgias over the art and nature of rhetoric, and essentially over the value of it as well. Socrates said that Gorgias's rhetoric imparted belief, not truth, and thus was a species of flattery. You'll be more acquainted with that in the weeks ahead. Socrates was the other key figure of the sophistical era, and Socrates lived from 436 to 338 BC. He was alive during the time of the intertestamental period. The prophet Malachi wrote his prophecy in 433. The Peloponnesian Wars were fought during that time. He studied rhetoric with Gorgias and was heavily influenced by him. It's an interesting thing because Socrates is not well known today. But in his day, Socrates overshadowed Aristotle. He was far more well known than Aristotle was during his day. He was a teacher. He established a school to train men in rhetoric, a school which he maintained for 50 years of his life, and he began a trend of liberal arts education in ancient Greece. He was known for his smooth prose as opposed to Gorgias's flowery and elaborate speeches. He aimed at clarity of thought. He was more of the Spartan mindset. Though he used long sentences, they were very balanced sentences. He wrote and read carefully contrived speeches. The interesting thing is, though, that Socrates, who was a teacher of rhetoric, was not himself a rhetorician. He did not deliver public addresses. He taught those who did. According to my notes, according to what I've been able to find, he appears to define rhetoric as a philosophy dealing with artistic speech. The next era of rhetoric is philosophical rhetoric, and where technical rhetoric emphasized the speech itself, sophistical rhetoric emphasized the speaker's ability, philosophical rhetoric emphasized the audience and taught their students to pay careful attention to the audience. Now, in the rhetoric that we'll be teaching this year, we'll emphasize all three: the speaker, the speech, and the audience, and teach you that all three actually need to be considered. But as with each of these different eras, there was a different emphasis that contributed to rhetoric. Now, the sophistical and philosophical rhetoricians, or teachers of rhetoric, were contemporaries. Gorgias and Socrates were contemporaries of Plato and Socrates and Aristotle and so on. Let me introduce you to the key figures of the philosophical era of rhetoric. Socrates was and is the most well-known of those. Socrates would use a method that was unique to him, distinct, in fact, named after him. We call it the Socratic method, that essentially involves asking questions that are used to herd somebody into a particular position. That's what Socrates would do with his students and in his debates and discussions and so on. Socrates lived from 469 to 399 BC. So again, essentially the same time as Gorgias. He was superficially similar to the sophists. They both taught orally. They showed an interest in paradox and the powerful use of words. Socrates is considered, even to this day, to be, besides Christ, the greatest teacher to ever live. In fact, John Milton Gregory refers to him as the greatest teacher next to Jesus Christ, who ever lived. It's an interesting thing how scholars are, and there's been some controversy among scholars, some debate about whether Socrates actually existed or whether Plato invented him and made him a character. The truth is, Socrates wrote nothing. We have no record of anything that Socrates wrote whatsoever. Everything that we know of Socrates comes from Plato and his record of Socrates. And Plato, he was, the two were contemporaries. Either Plato made up Socrates, but I don't believe so, because